The tear in Lady Cecily Arundel's glove sounded no louder than a sigh, but to her it seemed the whole ballroom must have heard it. She felt the delicate kid leather give beneath Lady Marianne Ellsworth's jewelled fingers, felt the cool air touch the skin between her thumb and wrist, and knew at once that the damage had not been an accident. Around them, Harrington House glittered with all the careless splendour of the London season. Chandeliers poured candlelight over silk gowns, black evening coats, polished slippers, and diamonds bright enough to make hunger look vulgar. Music floated from the far end of the room, a graceful country dance winding through the couples in measured steps, while matrons watched from their chairs like judges behind fans. It was London in the spring of 1818, and every woman present understood that a torn glove could say more than a spoken insult. It said poverty. It said dependence. It said a lady had come dressed as well as she could, and as well as she could was not enough. Cecily kept her hand still. She had learned long ago that pain made less sport for others when it was denied the satisfaction of movement. "Oh, dear," Marianne murmured, her blue eyes widening with a sweetness that never reached them. "I must have caught the seam. How unfortunate." Cecily looked down at the little split in the ivory leather. The glove had been mended twice before, though never where anyone could see. She had stitched it by candlelight 3 nights earlier, leaning close enough for the smoke to sting her eyes, because Lady Beatrice had said a woman of Cecily's birth must never appear shabby, even if Providence had made her inconveniently poor. Now the neat repair was ruined, and Marianne's smile said she knew exactly where to wound. "It is nothing," Cecily said. Her own voice was calm. That was something. Calm was the last possession no relative could confiscate. Lady Marianne tilted her head. "Nothing? I'm relieved. Aunt was worried you might draw notice tonight." "Marianne!" Lady Beatrice Ellsworth's warning came softly from behind them, but it held no rebuke. Lady Beatrice never scolded cruelty when cruelty served the family's ambitions. She only objected when it became inelegant. She was a handsome woman of 50, narrow of face, exact in posture, dressed in deep violet satin that announced mourning just enough to appear virtuous and wealth just enough to appear secure. Cecily knew both impressions were useful facades. Lady Beatrice touched Cecily's elbow and guided her half a step back toward the shadow of a marble column. It was done gently. It was done where everyone could see only good manners. "My dear," she said, "you must not stand so near the center of the room." Cecily lifted her eyes. "I was not aware I had done so." "That is precisely why guidance is necessary." Lady Beatrice smiled toward a passing countess, then lowered her voice. "Gratitude requires silence, Cecily. You are here because this house was kind enough to include our party, and because I was kind enough to bring you. Do not mistake inclusion for invitation." The words were familiar. They had followed Cecily for years, from breakfast rooms to carriages, from dress fittings to church pews. She was the daughter of the late Earl of Westmere, but rank without money was a portrait without a frame. After her father's death, Westmere had passed to a male cousin, distant enough to be polite and close enough to take possession. Cecily had been sent to Lady Beatrice, who called the arrangement family duty when others could hear, and charity when Cecily could not escape hearing. There had once been talk of a portion. There had once been mention of papers. Then Lady Beatrice had closed a drawer, dismissed the solicitor, and taught Cecily that questions made a dependent woman look ungrateful. Cecily folded the torn glove beneath her other hand. "I will remain where you wish me to remain." "That would be wise." Lady Beatrice's eyes moved toward Marianne, who had already turned her face toward the room with practiced radiance. "Your cousin has prospects tonight. I will not have them disturbed by awkwardness." Marianne lowered her fan just enough to show her smile. "Aunt, you make me sound desperate." "Not desperate," Lady Beatrice said. "Prepared." Cecily followed their gaze across the ballroom. It was no mystery what preparation meant. Marianne was in white silk trimmed with silver, her curls arranged to look accidental and her pearls chosen to suggest innocence at considerable expense. She had been trained all winter for one purpose. She was to attract a husband of rank high enough to rescue the Ellsworth name from debts no one mentioned directly. A marquis would do. A duke would be salvation. Cecily, by contrast, was to be useful and invisible. She could pour tea, answer letters, accompany Marianne on calls, and fill an empty place in a carriage when propriety required another lady. She was not to outshine. She was not to complain. She was certainly not to be noticed by anyone whose notice mattered. "Turn your wrist inward," Lady Beatrice murmured. "The glove shows." Cecily obeyed. The motion was small, but humiliation did not require grandeur. It only required witnesses. Across the room, near a bank of hothouse flowers, an older lady in pearl grey silk paused with her fan halfway raised. Lady Octavia Wraxhall had a face that fashion could not soften and intelligence could not hide. She was one of those formidable widows whom society obeyed because no one could decide whether she was generous or dangerous. Her gaze rested briefly on Cecily's hidden hand, then on Lady Beatrice, then back again. It was not pity in her expression. Pity slid over a person and left them colder. This was recognition, sharp and quiet. Cecily looked away first. Recognition was dangerous. It asked a woman to admit something had been done to her. Lady Beatrice leaned closer to Marianne, satisfied that Cecily had retreated into the proper shadow. "When he arrives, you will not rush," she said. "You will let Lady Jersey's niece make the first fool of herself. If the rumors are exaggerated, you may allow an introduction. If they are true, we shall adjust." Marianne's fan stilled. "And if he asks someone else to dance?" "No one will accept him quickly. Not if they have sense." Cecily did not mean to listen. Years of dependence had trained her ears against her will. Secrets lived in lowered voices. So did commands. "Is he truly so dreadful?" Marianne asked, and this time her sweetness thinned into curiosity. Lady Beatrice's mouth tightened. "His Grace is not dreadful. He is powerful, wealthy, unmarried, and badly marked by war. Those qualities make him inconvenient. There is also the matter of his brother. People say he left him. People say many things. It is enough that they say them." Marianne gave a soft shiver, though her eyes shone. A scar duke with a tragic past. How theatrical. Do not be foolish. A duke is never theatrical. A duke is strategy. Cecily glanced toward the doors, though no one had entered yet. She had heard of Gideon Vale, Duke of Alderwick, as everyone in London had heard of him. A title that old could not move quietly through society, no matter how its owner wished it. Some said he had returned from the war with half his face ruined and all his gentleness buried. Some said he never danced. Some said his brother had died calling his name. Cecily distrusted stories that made strangers into monsters. Society enjoyed monsters. They allowed ordinary cruelty to appear refined by comparison. Behind her, Lady Beatrice's voice dropped further. "The Westmere matter must remain closed until Marianne is settled. I will not have some old sealed instruction complicating the season." Cecily's breath caught. Westmere. Sealed instruction. The word struck with such force that she almost turned. Lady Beatrice stopped speaking at once, as if she had felt the movement before it happened. Her fingers closed over Cecily's arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind. "Did you hear something, my dear?" Cecily met her eyes. In the candles, Lady Beatrice looked almost kind. That was the most frightening thing about her. Only the music. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Lady Beatrice released her. "Good. Music is a far safer occupation for you than curiosity." Marianne laughed under her breath. Cecily lowered her gaze, but inside her something had gone very still. Her father's papers had not been forgotten. They had been closed. There was a difference. Before she could shape the thought further, a tremor passed through the ballroom. It began near the entrance, where footmen stiffened and conversations thinned. One fan stopped moving. Then another. Mothers who had spent the evening arranging daughters-like offerings drew them back with sudden concern. Young ladies who had stood too near the open floor remembered urgent thirst, urgent headaches, urgent duties to elderly aunts. The music continued, but the room changed around it. Anticipation sharpened into fear. Lady Beatrice's hand slid to Marianne's waist, guiding her into perfect visibility. "Remember," she whispered. "Not first. Never first." Cecily remained by the column, her torn glove turned inward, her heart beating with the strange force of words she was not meant to hear. Westmere. Sealed instruction. Closed. Then the doors opened. The footman stepped forward, lifted his chin, and his voice carried over the candlelit silence. His Grace, the Duke of Alderwick. For one breath after the announcement, Harrington House became a room made entirely of watching. Lady Cecily Arundel had seen silence descend before. It came when a girl stumbled in a dance, when a dowager dropped a name that ought not to be spoken, when a mother realized her daughter had laughed too loudly beside the wrong gentleman. This silence was different. It did not fall. It drew back. It made a path from the open doors to the center of the ballroom, and every person in that path seemed grateful not to stand at its end. His Grace Gideon Vale, Duke of Alderwick, entered without haste. He wore black evening dress cut with severe elegance, a white cravat tied so precisely it appeared almost defiant, and no ornament beyond a signet ring that caught one blade of candlelight as he removed his gloves. He was tall, but not in the careless, golden way London praised in young men who had never been tested by anything worse than boredom. His height seemed built from endurance. His shoulders carried stillness like armor. The scar began near his left temple and drew a pale line down toward his cheek, not monstrous, not grotesque, but unmistakable. It changed the symmetry of his face without diminishing its power. If anything, it made his beauty more difficult to dismiss, because it asked the room to look at what it wished to avoid. Most people failed the test. Fans rose. Eyes dipped. Smiles stiffened. Cecily, still beside the column with her torn glove turned inward, watched one mother touch her daughter's wrist and pull her back as though his Grace carried winter into the room. The Duke noticed. He would have had to be blind not to notice. Yet his expression did not alter. That was what disturbed society most, perhaps. A man visibly wounded who begged for gentleness might have comforted them. A man visibly wounded who required nothing exposed them instead. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened at Marianne's waist. Not first, she breathed. Marianne's face had lost a little of its color, though ambition remained bright in her eyes. He isn't as ruined as they said, she whispered. Hush. Lord Harrington, red-cheeked and nervous beneath his hospitality, hurried forward with the smile of a man greeting a storm he had invited for prestige and now regretted. He bowed. The Duke returned the courtesy with exact restraint. No warmth. No discourtesy. Simply rank acknowledging rank. Around them, conversations attempted to restart and failed. Fragments floated like torn lace. His brother. Waterloo, was it not? No, before that. They say he heard him call. They say he did nothing. Cecily heard enough to feel shame on behalf of the room. It amazed her how gently cruelty dressed itself when spoken behind silk fans. The Duke's gaze moved once across the ballroom. It did not seek admiration. It measured exits, faces, danger, perhaps habit left from war. Then Lady Harrington, with the desperate courage of a hostess whose evening must not collapse, turned toward her cluster of young ladies. Miss Farley, she said brightly, His Grace is fond of music, I believe. Perhaps the next dance? Miss Farley, a pretty girl in pale rose, looked at the Duke as if asked to cross a frozen river. Her mother gave a tiny nod that became a shake before it was complete. Miss Farley pressed one hand to her temple. I'm so sorry, Lady Harrington. I feel rather faint. It must be the heat. The room heard. The Duke heard. Lady Harrington's smile trembled, then moved on. Lady Sophia, perhaps you would do us the honor. Lady Sophia Bell, who had boasted at supper that she feared nothing but dull sermons, went very still. Her fan snapped open. I promised this set already. She had not. Everyone knew she had not. The nearest gentleman looked at his shoes, too cowardly to rescue either her lie or the man it wounded. A third attempt came from an elderly aunt who pushed forward her niece with more ambition than mercy. The girl took one look at the scar, one at the room, and stepped back so quickly her slipper brushed the hem of another lady's gown. I don't dance this one, she whispered, though the musicians were already forming the opening bars of a waltz. The insult was complete because it remained polite. No one had laughed. No one had sneered. No one had spoken a word that could be challenged. Yet in that glittering room, a Duke of England stood publicly refused by 3 ladies who would have accepted his title in a marriage contract if they could have done so without touching his hand. Cecily felt the torn place in her glove as if it had widened. She thought of Lady Beatrice's voice. Gratitude requires silence. She thought of the old sealed instruction, of her father's name folded away somewhere in a drawer. She thought of the Duke standing alone while the room congratulated itself for manners. Lady Beatrice shifted, already calculating whether Marianne should appear brave now that others had made refusal fashionable. Marianne lifted her chin, perhaps preparing to step forward when safety had been purchased by another woman's humiliation. Cecily moved first. It was not a grand movement. No music stopped. No glass shattered. She simply stepped out from the shelter of the column and into the open space where candlelight found the worn places in her gown and the tear in her glove. Lady Beatrice made a sound so soft it might have been a breath. Cecily. It was a warning. It was also too late. The Duke turned his head. His eyes were grey, not cold exactly, but clear in a way that made pretense feel childish. Cecily crossed the last few feet of polished floor. Every whisper died. She curtsied, not deeply enough to suggest pleading, not shallowly enough to suggest ignorance. Her heart beat hard beneath her bodice, but her hand was steady when she lifted it. The torn ivory glove faced upward between them. "Your Grace," she said, "if you still wish to dance, I should be honored." The room seemed to inhale. For a moment the Duke did not move. His gaze dropped to her offered hand, then to the tear at the seam, then to her face. Cecily expected surprise. She expected suspicion. She expected, perhaps, the weary irritation of a man who had learned to distrust gestures made in public. What she saw instead was attention. Complete attention. It rested on her with a weight that did not crush. "Lady Cecily Arundel," Lady Beatrice said from behind her, too loudly for intimacy and too softly for intervention. The Duke's eyes flicked once toward Lady Beatrice. Something in them sharpened. Then he bowed over Cecily's hand with such formal respect that the entire ballroom was forced to accept what he accepted. "The honor," he said, "is mine." He took her hand. He did not grasp it as if she had rescued him. He held it as if it were something entrusted to him before witnesses. His fingers were warm through the torn leather. Cecily became aware of 100 eyes following them as he led her to the set. The musicians, startled into duty, began again. The first measures of the waltz rose, delicate and almost apologetic. Cecily had danced often enough to know the steps, though rarely with anyone who looked at her as if she were present. The Duke moved with controlled grace. Not softness. Not stiffness. Control. She wondered if every movement had been relearned after war, every turn disciplined until pain could not be read by strangers. "You understand what you have done," he said quietly as they turned. His voice was low enough for her alone. "Yes." "Do you?" "I stepped into a dance, Your Grace. London may survive it." Something almost changed at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The memory of one. London survives many sins. It is less forgiving of kindness offered in public. Cecily looked past his shoulder at the faces blurring around them. Lady Beatrice's expression was frozen. Marianne's was bright with disbelief. Lady Octavia watched from her place near the flowers, her fan now closed. "Then London has poor priorities," Cecily said. "That is the most accurate thing anyone has said to me this evening." They moved through a turn. His hand remained at the proper distance against her back. Nothing in his manner crossed propriety, yet Cecily felt more seen than she had in years. It unsettled her. Being ignored had been lonely, but being seen was dangerous. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not quite a question. Cecily answered honestly. "I do not know you well enough to fear you. Most people require less. Most people prefer rumors. They are easier than judgment." His gaze held hers for one suspended beat. "And you do not prefer rumors. I have lived inside too many of them." The words escaped before caution could catch them. The Duke did not press. That restraint moved her more than curiosity would have. They completed the figure, and the room had no choice but to watch them do it well. Cecily felt the first shift in the air. Surprise had not become approval, but it had become attention, and attention was power of a dangerous sort. Near the end of the dance, his thumb paused lightly beside the torn seam of her glove, not touching skin, only marking the damage. "You have more courage than this room deserves," he said. Cecily's throat tightened. Praise usually embarrassed her because it so often came with a hook beneath it. This sounded like recognition, and recognition was harder to bear. "Perhaps I merely dislike waste," she answered. A perfectly good dance was being ruined. This time the almost smile reached his eyes for less than a second. Then the final notes faded. Applause came thinly, uncertain and late. The Duke released her at once, as propriety required, but he did not step away before bowing again. "Lady Cecily." "Your Grace." She curtsied, aware that her life at Ellsworth House had just become more difficult. Lady Beatrice was already moving toward her with a face composed for murder by courtesy. Marianne followed, her mouth tight. Cecily drew her torn hand inward by instinct. The Duke saw the movement. His voice lowered, so quiet the room could not steal it. "Who tore your glove?" Cecily had survived enough drawing rooms to understand that a question could be more dangerous than an accusation. "Who tore your glove?" The Duke of Alderwick had asked it so quietly that only she should have heard, yet the word seemed to open a door in the ballroom floor. For a second, she imagined answering. She imagined turning her hand palm upward and naming Lady Marianne Ellsworth before every jeweled witness who had watched kindness become spectacle. She imagined Lady Beatrice's face losing its polish. She imagined the room forced to choose between truth and convenience. Then Lady Beatrice reached them. "Your Grace," she said, with a curtsy measured to the exact depth owed to a duke and not 1 inch more. "How generous of you to partner my niece. Lady Cecily has always been eager to be useful." Useful. Not graceful. Not brave. Not kind. Useful. Cecily felt the words slide around her like a servant's apron tied over a silk gown. Gideon's gaze did not leave her face at once. He waited one beat, as though giving her room to answer his question if she chose. That restraint made the silence harder. "Lady Cecily was not useful," he said at last, turning to Lady Beatrice. "She was honorable." Lady Beatrice's smile held, but something tightened beneath it. "You are very gracious." "No," the Duke said. "I am precise." The air around them changed. Marianne, who had come up behind her aunt, gave a small laugh too light to be natural. "How serious we all are over a dance. Cecily, you must be exhausted by so much attention." "I am quite well," Cecily said. "Are you?" Marianne's smile sharpened. "Of course. I didn't just astonish half of London." "No," Cecily replied before she could stop herself. "You did not." It was a small sentence. It was not even cruel. Yet Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed toward her with warning. Gideon saw that too. Cecily knew he did because his expression grew still in that particular way, not blank but attentive, as if each small movement in front of him had been placed upon a map. The supper room doors opened nearby, and the slow current of society began carrying guests toward champagne, lemonade, delicate sandwiches, and safer conversation. Lady Beatrice took Cecily's elbow with a softness that belonged to performance. "My dear, we should step aside. You have had quite enough excitement." The Duke's gaze fell to the hand Lady Beatrice had claimed. Cecily felt the pressure of those fingers through the sleeve of her gown, polite and unyielding. "Lady Beatrice," he said, "with your permission, I shall escort Lady Cecily to the supper room." Lady Beatrice could not refuse without creating the scene she feared. A duke's public courtesy was a command dressed in velvet. "Naturally, Your Grace." She released Cecily. "Marianne and I will follow at once." Cecily walked beside Gideon beneath 100 glances. No one stood in their way. That was the first lesson his rank taught her. A woman alone could be cornered by whispers. A duke moving through a room parted them without effort. Yet he did not crowd her. He kept the proper distance, offered no familiarity, and spoke only when the music and murmurs covered them. "You did not answer me." "No, was that choice or fear?" Cecily looked toward the supper room, where candles reflected in silver trays and guests pretended not to watch them enter. In my position, Your Grace, the two are often dressed alike. His jaw shifted slightly. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. He accepted that, though not easily. A footman offered lemonade. Cecily took a glass because her hand needed occupation. Gideon declined. Around them, conversation revived in fragments, each one arranged to wound without responsibility. Astonishing nerve. Poor relation, is she not? Perhaps she thought pity might serve where beauty failed. One cannot blame a girl for ambition. But with him? Hush, he may hear. He did hear. Cecily knew it by the faint tightening around his eyes. She had the sudden, strange wish to apologize to him for all of them. Not because he required defense, but because he had been forced to stand among people who wanted his title and rejected his humanity. Before she could speak, Marianne's voice floated from behind her. Cecily, Aunt wishes you to come away. Lady Beatrice arrived with a face of grave concern, as if rescuing a child from misbehavior. My dear, I believe a word is necessary. A word? Cecily asked. An apology. The room did not go silent this time. It leaned closer while pretending to nibble sugared fruit. Lady Beatrice kept her voice low enough to seem private and clear enough to be overheard. You meant well, no doubt. But such impulsiveness may be misinterpreted. His Grace is too courteous to say so. A public apology would put the matter to rest. Cecily's fingers tightened around the lemonade glass. The coolness steadied her. To whom am I apologizing? To His Grace, of course. And to our hostess. You placed yourself forward in a way that invited comment. Marianne's eyes gleamed. You know how people talk, Cecily. Don't make it worse by pretending you don't. Cecily looked at the Duke. He was watching Lady Beatrice now, not with anger displayed, but with something colder because it was governed. She knew then that he understood the shape of the trap. If she apologized, her kindness became offense. If she refused, her dignity became arrogance. Lady Beatrice had built a cage from manners. Cecily drew breath. I regret any discomfort caused to Lady Harrington, she said carefully. I do not regret accepting a dance. Marianne gave a tiny gasp, perfectly timed. Lady Beatrice's hand moved, as if she would take Cecily's arm again. Gideon stepped half a pace forward. It was not dramatic. It was enough. Lady Beatrice stopped. There is no apology required, he said. The words carried. Several guests ceased pretending to speak. Lady Cecily offered courtesy where others withheld it. If that has caused discomfort, the fault does not rest with her. Color rose under Lady Beatrice's powder. Your Grace is generous to view it so. Again, Lady Beatrice, I am not generous. I am precise. A silence spread from those nearest them, outward in a widening ring. Cecily felt it touch her shoulders like cold water. She had been defended before in small ways, usually by people who wanted credit for pity. This did not feel like pity. It felt like a line drawn on polished floor. Marianne recovered first. How noble, she said softly. Though perhaps some ladies are fortunate in finding protection so quickly. The suggestion slid into the room and settled exactly where she intended it. Cecily heard it. So did the women near the punch bowl. A gentleman looked away, uncomfortable but entertained. Lady Beatrice gave Marianne a warning glance too late to erase the damage. Gideon turned his head toward Marianne. Protection is not fortune when it is made necessary by cruelty. Marianne's fan stopped moving. I don't know what you mean. That seems unlikely. Cecily's heart struck once, hard. Lady Beatrice intervened with speed. Your Grace, I fear my niece is tired. She is unused to so much attention, and attention can make young women forget themselves. Then I shall not keep her long. Gideon looked back to Cecily. Lady Cecily, if Lady Beatrice permits, I would be honored to pay a morning call at Ellsworth House tomorrow. Lady Beatrice's expression flickered. The room heard the request. That was the point. A morning call after a public dance was not a proposal, not even a declaration, but it was enough to turn gossip into expectation. It told London that he did not consider Cecily an embarrassment to be forgotten after one set. "How kind," Lady Beatrice said. "Our house is modest, but we would be honoured, naturally." "At 11, then?" "Of course." Cecily had not agreed. That realization passed through her with an odd mixture of alarm and gratitude. He had asked permission through the rules, but his eyes came to her as if the real answer was hers. "Lady Cecily," he said. In that moment, she could refuse. He had made space for it. Lady Beatrice would punish her either way. Marianne would sharpen the story either way. London would talk either way. Cecily lowered her glass. "At 11, Your Grace." Something eased in his face, so faint no one else would have named it. Lady Beatrice began at once to gather control around them. "Come, Cecily. You have done enough for one evening." Cecily turned with her, but as she did, the torn seam of her glove brushed the edge of the silver tray. A loose ivory thread caught and pulled free. She saw it fall. Before she could retrieve it, Gideon bent and lifted it from the carpet. The movement was small, almost invisible beneath the renewed hum of conversation. But Cecily saw the thread lying across his black-gloved palm like evidence. He closed his hand over it. Lady Beatrice did not notice. Marianne was too busy accepting a whisper from another young lady. Cecily noticed. So did Lady Octavia Wraxhall from across the supper room. Gideon bowed to Cecily with formal distance, yet his eyes held the question he had asked before and would not forget. "Who tore your glove?" Cecily looked away first, because she had no safe answer yet. Behind her, Lady Beatrice's voice turned soft as silk drawn over a blade. "By morning," she murmured, "you will understand the cost of making yourself visible." At 11 o'clock the next morning, Ellsworth House had never looked more respectable or more afraid. Lady Cecily Arundel knew this because respectability, when frightened, became almost violent in its neatness. The drawing-room had been arranged as if a royal inspection were expected rather than one morning call. The faded Aubusson carpet had been brushed until its worn places lay obediently beneath the chairs. The silver tea service shone with a brightness that could not disguise the fact that Lady Beatrice had dismissed 2 footmen the previous winter and still spoke of household economy as if it were moral discipline. Fresh flowers stood on the pianoforte, though Cecily had seen the maid cutting away the browned edges of yesterday's roses not 30 minutes before. Even the fire seemed instructed to burn politely. Cecily sat where Lady Beatrice had placed her, in a low chair near the tea table, with the light falling just behind her rather than upon her face. Marianne occupied the blue silk settee opposite the door, arranged beneath the portrait of a dead Ellsworth admiral whose gold frame made everyone beneath it look poorer. Lady Beatrice had chosen violet again. Cecily wore dove grey, because it was the least offensive gown in her possession, and because Lady Beatrice had said it made her look suitably subdued. The torn ivory glove lay hidden in Cecily's work basket upstairs, but she still felt the rip as if it had been stitched into her skin. "Remember," Lady Beatrice said, adjusting 1 teaspoon by a 1/4 inch, "His Grace is not to be encouraged into believing last night's incident has significance." Marianne smiled at her reflection in the tea urn. "Of course not. We must rescue him from the misunderstanding." Cecily looked at her folded hands. "Was there a misunderstanding?" Lady Beatrice turned. "There will be if you continue to speak before thinking." "Then I shall think very carefully." "Cecily." The name came softly, which made it worse. "Your position in this house depends upon your ability to recognize kindness when it is extended to you." Cecily lifted her eyes. "And when it is withdrawn?" Marianne laughed. "You do become philosophical when you are frightened." Before Cecily could answer, the butler appeared in the doorway with a card on a salver. Lady Beatrice took it, though everyone knew whose name it bore. Her hand paused only once before she said, "Show His Grace in." The room changed before the Duke entered. Cecily felt it in her ribs, the same tightening that had passed through Harrington House, though here the space was smaller and there were fewer places to hide. When Gideon Vale stepped into the drawing-room, he brought with him the severe black elegance of the previous night, but daylight altered him. Candlelight had made his scar dramatic. Morning made it human. It showed the pale line near his temple, the slight unevenness at his cheek, the disciplined stillness of a man who had learned that every stranger's gaze must be endured without flinching. Lady Beatrice rose with a curtsy deep enough to honor his rank and controlled enough to protect her pride. Marianne followed, all grace and white muslin. Cecily stood last because her chair was low and Lady Beatrice had intended it to be so. The Duke noticed. His gaze moved from the height of the chair to Cecily's face. He bowed. Lady Beatrice. Lady Marianne. Lady Cecily. He said her name last, but not least. That was the first disturbance. Lady Beatrice gestured toward the best chair, the one angled near Marianne. Your Grace, how kind of you to call. We feared last night's crowd might have tired you. Crowds rarely tire me, Gideon said. Their conclusions do. Marianne's fan opened. Then London must be exhausting. Often. Cecily looked down before anyone saw the small movement at her mouth. Lady Beatrice poured tea with hands that had never trembled in public. Lady Marianne was just speaking of the music at Harrington House. She has always had an excellent ear. Marianne leaned forward at once. I thought the waltz rather pretty, Your Grace, though perhaps a little melancholy. Did you? Gideon accepted the cup but did not drink. Yes. Though I confess I prefer Italian airs. They have more feeling, don't they? It was a polished invitation. Cecily recognized the shape of it. Marianne did not care for Italian airs beyond the fact that mentioning them made a young lady sound educated without risking an opinion. The Duke turned his cup once in its saucer. Lady Cecily, did you find the waltz melancholy? Silence snapped into place. Lady Beatrice's hand stilled above the sugar bowl. Marianne's fan stopped mid-flutter. Cecily felt, absurdly, as if she had been pulled from the low chair into the center of the room without moving. I found it restrained, she said. That is not the same thing. Gideon's attention settled on her fully. How so? Melancholy asks to be noticed. Restraint does not always have that luxury. Lady Beatrice set down the sugar tongs with a faint click. Cecily has a habit of making simple matters sound grave. Perhaps simple matters are sometimes made simple by people who do not suffer them, Gideon said. The room went quiet enough for Cecily to hear the fire shift in the grate. Marianne recovered with a smile. Cecily reads a great deal, Your Grace. It gives her unusual turns of phrase. How fortunate for the conversation. Cecily lowered her eyes, not from shame this time, but because she needed a moment to steady herself. To be asked a question was one thing. To have her answer defended was another. Lady Beatrice changed direction with practiced speed. You must forgive our little household. We are still unsettled after last night. It is never pleasant when a young lady becomes the object of talk. I agree. Gideon looked at Cecily's hands. She had worn fresh gloves, pale grey, carefully darned at the wrist. It is especially unpleasant when the talk is encouraged by those who know better. Marianne's cheeks colored. People will talk whether one encourages them or not. People also stop when consequence arrives. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Lady Beatrice smiled, but her gaze sharpened. Surely Your Grace does not mean to trouble yourself over a torn glove and a little ballroom nonsense. I rarely decide what deserves my attention according to what others call nonsense. How admirable. How necessary. Tea cooled. Marianne sat back, her charm forced her weight for safer ground. Lady Beatrice began speaking of the season, the expected crush at Almack's, the difficulty of finding proper musicians, and the regrettable boldness of girls whose families lacked guidance. Each topic was placed like a screen between Gideon and Cecily. Each time, he answered with enough courtesy to make impatience impossible to accuse, and enough brevity to make evasion useless. Then the butler appeared again at the door. My lady, he said, Mr. Fenton asks whether the old Westmere papers are to remain in the locked cabinet or be sent down with the account books. The effect was small and immediate. Lady Beatrice's face did not change, but her whole body seemed to close around the interruption. Cecily's breath caught before she could prevent it. Westmere papers. Locked cabinet. Gideon's gaze moved once to Cecily, then to Lady Beatrice. Tell Mr. Fenton, Lady Beatrice said, each word smooth and cold, that no Westmere papers are required today. He should know better than to raise household matters while guests are present. The butler bowed and disappeared. Marianne looked irritated rather than alarmed, which told Cecily she understood less than her aunt. Gideon set down his untouched tea. "Westmere was your father's earldom, was it not, Lady Cecily?" "Yes, your grace," Lady Beatrice answered before Cecily could continue. "A sad business, but long settled. The estate naturally passed as it must. Lady Cecily has been under my care since." "Under your care," he repeated. "Yes. That is a heavy responsibility. One I have never neglected." Cecily heard the hidden command in Lady Beatrice's tone. "Agree. Be grateful. Remain small." Gideon did not look away from Lady Beatrice. "Then Lady Cecily is fortunate." The words were mild. The doubt beneath them was not. Marianne rose and moved toward the pianoforte, eager to reclaim the room. "Your Grace, since we speak of music, perhaps I might play something less restrained than last night's waltz." "Another time, perhaps." The refusal was perfectly courteous and absolute. Lady Beatrice's smile thinned. "You must not let us keep you if you have other calls." Gideon stood. Everyone rose with him. "I have taken enough of your morning." He bowed first to Lady Beatrice, then Marianne, then Cecily. When his gaze reached her, it paused only long enough to be felt and not long enough to be improper. "Lady Cecily, I thank you for your answer about the music." She curtsied. "It was only an opinion, your Grace." "Opinions are rarely only anything." Lady Beatrice moved with him toward the door, all gracious dismissal. In the hall, beyond the half-open drawing-room door, Cecily heard the butler accept the Duke's hat and gloves. She also heard Lady Beatrice say, lower now, His Grace must not concern himself with family remnants. Old papers gather dust, nothing more. Gideon's reply came after a pause. Dust often preserves what people mean to bury. Then he was gone. The front door closed. The drawing-room seemed smaller without him, and colder. Lady Beatrice turned back slowly. For a moment, she looked not merely annoyed, but afraid. Cecily had never seen fear on her face before, and the sight opened something sharp beneath Cecily's ribs. Marianne snapped her fan shut. "Well, that was duller than I expected." Lady Beatrice did not answer her. She looked at Cecily. "You will not speak of Westmere papers again." Cecily's voice was quiet. "I did not speak of them." "See that you never do." Outside, in the Duke's carriage, Gideon Vale removed from his pocket the loose ivory thread he had taken from Harrington House and laid it across his palm. Across from him, his secretary waited with a small leather notebook already open. Gideon looked once toward the windows of Ellsworth House. "Send to Mr. Harbury," he said. "I want every sealed instruction, settlement draft, and trust paper connected to the late Earl of Westmere found before Lady Beatrice remembers how to hide them better." The secretary bowed his head. "At once, your Grace." Gideon closed his hand over the thread. The torn glove had been a small thing. He was certain now it was only the surface wound. By breakfast the next morning, the torn glove had become less a piece of leather than a story London wished to own. Cecily discovered it not from Lady Beatrice, who preferred to deliver cruelty in person, but from the folded gossip sheet placed beside the tea-urn as if it had been laid there by accident. It had not. Nothing in Ellsworth House was accidental when Lady Beatrice was displeased. Cecily entered the breakfast room in the plain blue morning gown she had worn too often to deceive anyone, and found Marianne already seated with the paper in her hands, smiling at a paragraph she did not need to read twice. Lady Beatrice sat at the head of the table, breaking a roll into pieces too small to eat. She looked composed. That meant punishment had been chosen. "Good morning, Cecily," Marianne said brightly. "You are famous." Cecily paused by her chair. "That seems unlikely." "Oh, don't be modest." Modesty is wasted after one has taken possession of a duke in full view of the town. Lady Beatrice lifted her eyes. "Marianne, I am only reading what everyone else shall read." Marianne smoothed the sheet and lowered her voice into a dramatic softness. A certain lady of reduced comfort, known more for useful attendance than beauty, has discovered a novel method of attracting rank. A torn glove, a public rescue, and a wounded duke may yet prove stronger than a dowry. Cecily felt the words strike in stages. Reduced comfort. Useful attendance. Not beauty. Wounded duke. The room did not move, yet she had the sensation of being pushed back toward the column at Harrington House, back into the place where she was meant to disappear. She drew out her chair and sat before her knees could betray her. How industrious of them, she said. They managed to be inaccurate in every direction. Marianne's smile slipped, then returned sharper. You deny the glove was torn. I deny that it was a method. Lady Beatrice set down her knife. You will not answer gossip with cleverness. It only suggests guilt. Silence suggests guilt as well, when people have already decided to hear it. Silence suggests breeding. Cecily looked at the untouched tea in her cup. Then I have been very well bred for years. The sentence landed before she could call it back. Marianne stared at her. Lady Beatrice went still. The stillness was worse than anger. You are overwrought, Lady Beatrice said. That is understandable. Girls who are not accustomed to notice often mistake discomfort for importance. Cecily folded her hands in her lap where the table hid them. She had not worn the ivory glove, but its absence felt like a confession. I do not wish for importance. No. You wish to be seen by a duke. That is far more practical. Marianne laughed behind her cup. Cecily turned to her. Did you give them the phrase about a torn glove? The cup paused. Marianne's eyes widened with practiced innocence. I don't know what you mean. It is a simple question. Lady Beatrice's voice cut between them. It is an impertinent one. Cecily looked back at her. Then I have my answer. Lady Beatrice rose. No one else did. The power of the room altered at once, as it always did when she stood. You will not attend Mrs. Calverton's musical evening tonight. I did not know I had been invited. You were not. Marianne was. I had considered allowing you to accompany us for propriety. That consideration is withdrawn. Marianne lowered the sheet just enough to reveal satisfaction. It would be unkind to expose you to more talk. Cecily heard the kindness in that sentence and felt a tiredness deeper than sleep. How thoughtful. Do not take that tone, Lady Beatrice said. This family has sheltered you at considerable inconvenience. From what, precisely? The question surprised even Cecily. Lady Beatrice's gaze sharpened. From the consequences of having no settled place of your own. My father believed I had one. Silence followed. It was brief, but it opened like a crack in old plaster. Lady Beatrice's hand tightened on the back of her chair. Your father left confusion. I have provided order. And the Westmere papers. Marianne looked from one to the other. For the first time, curiosity displaced malice on her face. Lady Beatrice turned to the bell-pull. This conversation is finished. For whom? Cecily asked quietly. Lady Beatrice did not answer. She rang, and a footman appeared with such speed that he must have been waiting in the passage. If any notes arrive for Lady Cecily, they are to be brought to me first, Lady Beatrice said. Yes, my lady. Cecily's pulse tightened. My notes. Lady Beatrice faced her again, calm restored. Until this foolishness passes, your correspondence will be supervised. You have shown poor judgment. By dancing. By forgetting the difference between compassion and display. Marianne folded the gossip sheet with care. Perhaps Bath would improve your nerves. The word fell too smoothly to be a passing cruelty. Cecily looked at Lady Beatrice. Bath? My cousin Mrs. Pember has written. She requires a companion. A quiet household would do you good. Cecily understood. It was not a visit. It was removal. A woman could be buried very neatly in a respectable house 30 miles from the life she had almost touched. When? If necessary, within the week. Lady Beatrice's voice softened. Do not force necessity upon me. Before Cecily could answer, the footman returned, this time with a salver. A cream envelope lay upon it, sealed in dark wax. Lady Beatrice took it first, as ordered. Her face changed when she saw the crest. It was small. It was enough. Marianne leaned forward. "Who is it from?" Lady Beatrice broke the seal. Cecily felt the impropriety of it like a slap, but she said nothing. A dependent woman's privacy was treated as a luxury, like lace or a second pair of evening shoes. Lady Beatrice read. Her lips pressed together. "Well?" Marianne demanded. "His Grace the Duke of Alderwick requests the pleasure of our company in his box at the opera tomorrow evening." Marianne stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Our company? Mine, yours, and Lady Cecily's." Cecily's breath stopped for one painful beat. Not a secret note. Not a jewel. Not flowers that could be twisted into evidence of impropriety. A proper invitation. A public one. He had used the rules like a shield. Lady Beatrice read the lines again, searching for a flaw. There was none. A duke's invitation to an opera box, extended to guardian, cousin, and niece, could not easily be refused without insult. Marianne's expression moved through shock, calculation, and envy. Perhaps he means to apologize for the attention he caused. Perhaps, Lady Beatrice said, though she did not believe it. Cecily kept her voice even. "Shall you decline?" Lady Beatrice looked at her then. The question had trapped her because she had taught Cecily too well. To decline a duke without reason would create new talk. To accept would place Cecily back in public under his protection. "We shall accept," she said at last. "You will behave with restraint." "I intended to watch the opera." "You will do more than watch. You will remember that every eye in London now looks for vulgarity in you." Cecily touched the edge of the table, grounding herself in the smooth wood. "Then I must disappoint them." Marianne gave a soft laugh. "Do be careful, Cecily. Disappointment is all very noble when one has nothing to lose." Cecily looked at the envelope in Lady Beatrice's hand. For years, she had believed obedience was the price of shelter. Yet shelter had not protected her glove, her name, her correspondence, or her father's memory. It had only made every insult easier to administer indoors. "I have learned," she said slowly, "that having nothing to lose is often said by people who have been taking things all along." Lady Beatrice's face hardened. "Go to your room." Cecily rose. She did not snatch the invitation. She did not demand the gossip sheet. She did not ask again about Bath or Westmere. She had asked enough for one morning, and each answer had shown her more than Lady Beatrice intended. At the door, Marianne called after her, "You shouldn't look so hopeful. London doesn't admire desperation for long." Cecily turned back. Her fear remained. Hope remained with it, smaller but more stubborn. "Then let us see what London admires when desperation stands upright." She left before Lady Beatrice could forbid the sentence from existing. 2 streets away, in a quiet office smelling of sealing wax and dust, Mr. Harbury, solicitor to the Duke of Alderwick, unfolded a memorandum with care. Gideon stood by the window, his hat in one hand, the loose ivory thread wrapped in paper on the desk behind him. There was indeed a protected portion intended for Lady Cecily's separate use, Mr. Harbury said. The late Earl of Westmere made reference to a sealed instruction before his death. Gideon did not turn. "Who holds it?" "That is less clear." "Make it clear." Mr. Harbury hesitated. "If Lady Beatrice has delayed access, she may already suspect inquiry." Gideon looked toward the grey line of London rooftops. Somewhere beyond them, a woman with a torn glove was being taught that visibility had a cost. "Then we shall move before she teaches her the cost of disappearing." The opera house made cruelty sound almost civilized. It gathered in velvet boxes and beneath painted ceilings, hid behind pearl opera glasses, and moved from mouth to mouth while violins tuned in the pit below. Lady Cecily Arundel felt it the moment she stepped from the corridor into the Duke of Alderwick's box. It was not the same as Harrington House, where the insult had waited in a ballroom's open glitter. Here the danger was arranged in tiers, each box a small kingdom, each fan a banner, each lifted glass another eye. Lady Beatrice entered first, because she would rather face a cannon than appear uncertain before society. Marianne followed in pale green silk that made her look delicate from a distance and triumphant up close. Cecily came last, wearing the same dove grey gown altered with fresh ribbon at the sleeves. The new gloves were not ivory. Lady Beatrice had refused to let her wear the old pair, then had locked them away in a drawer as if leather could misbehave on its own. Yet Cecily felt the missing glove more sharply than she had felt its presence. It had become the shape of every question no one wished her to answer. His Grace rose as they entered. So did the two gentlemen already in the box, Lord Harrington and an elderly cousin of the Duke whose name Cecily did not catch. The movement was proper, automatic, and still it startled her. In Ellsworth House, people stood for Lady Beatrice. Here, because the Duke stood, everyone else honoured the women he received. Even Marianne's eyes widened at the force of that simple fact. Gideon bowed first to Lady Beatrice, then to Marianne, then to Cecily. His scar looked paler under the golden lamps, his black evening coat severe against the crimson walls. He did not smile for the audience peering from nearby boxes. He did not hide from them either. Lady Beatrice. Lady Marianne. Lady Cecily. I am grateful you accepted. Lady Beatrice gave him the look she used when accepting something she had been unable to refuse. Your Grace overwhelms us with courtesy. Courtesy should not overwhelm. His gaze passed briefly to Cecily. It should relieve. Marianne lowered herself into the chair nearest the front of the box before Lady Beatrice could assign it to her. How beautifully said. You must forgive me if I stare at the house instead of the stage. Half of London seems to be staring back. Only half. Lord Harrington attempted a laugh and failed. Gideon offered Lady Beatrice the chair beside Marianne. That left Cecily a place slightly behind them, near the side curtain, where she could see the stage without being displayed. She recognized the kindness of it at once. He had not hidden her. He had given her a place where she could breathe. Thank you, Your Grace, she said softly as she sat today. For the seat? For the thought? He did not answer immediately. It seemed a small thing. Small things are often where people reveal themselves. His eyes held hers for one measured second, and then the overture began. Conversation became murmured, contained, and therefore more dangerous. Marianne leaned toward the railing of the box, aware of every glass turned in her direction. Lady Beatrice watched the opposite boxes and counted influence as other women counted notes in the music. Cecily watched the stage, but she felt the Duke's stillness beside the curtain as one feels the presence of a closed door that may open at any moment. The soprano appeared to applause. Her voice rose clear and bright, filling the great house with grief made beautiful enough for strangers to enjoy. Cecily wondered whether that was what society preferred. Pain was acceptable when sung in Italian, dressed in satin, and kept safely distant. In the first pause between scenes, Marianne turned from the stage with a little sigh. How affecting, she said. Though I confess, tragic figures are most pleasing when one may observe them from a comfortable seat. Lady Beatrice's fan lifted. Marianne. I meant the opera, aunt. Marianne's eyes slid toward Gideon, then to Cecily. But London does have a taste for tragedy this week. Wounded heroes. Ruined gloves. Ladies who collect damaged things. Lord Harrington looked down at his programme. The elderly cousin coughed. Lady Beatrice's fan froze before it resumed with forced calm. Cecily felt the sentence enter the box and wait there, smiling. It was meant to make her deny compassion. It was meant to make the Duke feel displayed. She could have bowed her head. That would have pleased Lady Beatrice. She could have looked to Gideon and waited for rescue. That would have pleased Marianne more. Instead, Cecily turned to her cousin. Some people mistake cruelty for refinement because refinement gives it better gloves. The fan in Lady Beatrice's hand stopped completely. Marianne's lips parted. For one reckless heartbeat, Cecily feared she had gone too far. Then Gideon stood. The movement was quiet, but every gentleman in the box rose with him. Cecily had been seated. Now, because the Duke stood, because she turned slightly as if to adjust her place, because etiquette demanded balance in that small contained space, Marianne and Lady Beatrice had to rise as well. The insult Marianne had meant to leave Cecily sitting beneath now required the entire box to acknowledge her presence. No one outside could hear the words, but several could see the arrangement. They saw Lady Cecily standing beside the Duke of Alderwick while her cousin's smile faltered. Gideon did not look at Marianne first. He looked at Cecily. "Would you care for air at the back of the box, Lady Cecily? It is warmer near the front." The offer was perfect. Public enough to protect her. Mild enough to avoid scandal. Cecily inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Grace. It is a little warm." Lady Beatrice had no choice but to permit the movement. "Do not block Lady Marianne's view," she said, because she could not think of anything worse that sounded polite. Cecily moved 2 steps back, not outside the box, not into impropriety, merely away from the small battlefield of chairs. Gideon remained standing until she was settled. Only then did he sit. The other men followed. Marianne sat last. Her face had gone bright with anger. The next act began, and for several minutes Cecily let the music shelter her. She did not tremble. She had expected to. That surprised her. Something had changed between the ballroom and this box. Fear remained, but obedience had cracked. Through that crack, breath entered. When applause rose again, Lady Beatrice leaned close under cover of the sound. "You will apologize to your cousin when we are home." Cecily kept her gaze on the stage. "For what?" "For making yourself unpleasant." "I answered an insult." "You exposed one." "That is not the same thing." Cecily looked at her then. "No. It is not." Lady Beatrice's eyes hardened, but Gideon's voice cut gently across the space before she could reply. "Lady Cecily, do you follow the story?" Cecily turned to him. "I believe so. A woman is condemned because others find her grief inconvenient." His gaze sharpened with interest. "And the hero?" "He arrives late and sings beautifully." The elderly cousin made a startled sound that might have been amusement. Gideon's mouth moved almost into a smile. "You disapprove of him." "I distrust men who are eloquent only after silence has cost someone else dearly." The words seemed to settle between them with more meaning than she had intended. Gideon accepted them without defense. A fair distrust. Marianne leaned forward. "How severe you are tonight, Cecily. Anyone would think you had become a philosopher between breakfast and supper." "No," Cecily said. "Only attentive." "To what?" "To who laughs when another person is made small." Marianne's fan closed slowly. Gideon did not intervene. That was its own form of respect. Cecily felt it. He was not leaving her alone. He was letting her stand. The final act began before Marianne could answer, and the music swept over the box with such force that conversation became impossible. Cecily watched the stage, but she knew Gideon was no longer hiding his scar in shadow. He sat angled toward the light, as if tired of accommodating the discomfort of strangers. Without thinking, she placed her gloved hands in her lap where anyone might see them. The new gloves were plain, but they were whole. Still, she did not fold one hand over the other to conceal where the old tear had been. When the curtain fell and applause thundered through the house, Gideon rose again. This time Cecily rose without waiting to see whether anyone approved. Lady Beatrice saw. So did Marianne. So did, from a nearby box, Lady Octavia Wraxhall, whose gaze rested on Cecily with that same unsettling recognition. As they prepared to depart, a footman in Alderwick livery appeared at the rear curtain and murmured to the Duke. Gideon took the folded note, read it once, and placed it inside his coat. His expression did not change, but Cecily had begun to understand that his stillness often marked the moment something within him moved quickly. Lady Beatrice noticed the note. "I hope there is no unpleasant news, Your Grace." "Not unpleasant," Gideon said. "Merely clarifying." Marianne smiled. "How mysterious." "Only to those who prefer confusion." Lady Beatrice's face cooled. Cecily felt the air tighten again. In the corridor, while cloaks were fetched and voices swelled around them, Gideon stepped just near enough to speak without being overheard. "My solicitor has learned that access to certain Westmere documents was delayed." Cecily looked up at him. The opera house, the lamps, the passing crowd all seemed to recede. Delayed by whom? That is the next question. His eyes moved toward Lady Beatrice, who stood several feet away accepting compliments she did not want. But I do not believe delay is the same as accident. Cecily's fingers closed around the edge of her shawl. For years, the past had been a locked room. Now she had heard something move behind the door. Why tell me? She asked. Because it concerns you. The answer was so simple that it hurt. Lady Beatrice called her name before she could respond. Gideon bowed, formal again. Lady Cecily. Your Grace. She turned away, but this time she did not feel smaller for doing so. Behind her, the opera house glittered and murmured, already hungry for another story. Ahead, Lady Beatrice waited with anger dressed as patience. Cecily walked toward her with her head raised, carrying the dangerous knowledge that the Duke had not merely noticed her wound. He had begun to look for the hand that made it. By the evening of Mrs. Calverton's dinner, London had learned to pronounce Lady Cecily Arundel's name as though it were a question no respectable person should answer too kindly. The invitation had not originally included her. Lady Beatrice had said so 3 times while dressing, each repetition sharper than the last, but the Duchess of Alderwick had never existed, and a Duke's attention created vacancies where society had once placed walls. Mrs. Calverton, who loved consequence more than comfort, had sent a revised card by noon. Lady Cecily was expected. Not welcomed. Expected. There was a difference, and Cecily felt it the moment she entered the candlelit dining room behind Lady Beatrice and Marianne. The table shone with crystal, silver, and enough hothouse flowers to perfume judgment. 30 guests had been arranged with the care of a campaign. Cecily's place was neither insultingly low nor safely high. It was visible. That was worse. Gideon Vale stood near the mantel, speaking with Lord Harrington, his black coat severe against the pale marble. His scar caught the light when he turned, and once again the room pretended not to notice while noticing nothing else. His gaze found Cecily. It did not linger beyond propriety. It steadied her anyway. Lady Beatrice saw the glance and smiled with such discipline that Cecily knew trouble had already been prepared. Dinner began with soup, fish, and conversation polished smooth enough to conceal knives beneath it. Marianne, seated across from Cecily, appeared unusually serene. That frightened Cecily more than open malice would have done. Open malice was aflame. Serenity was a closed drawer. Mrs. Calverton raised a jeweled hand during the second course and laughed softly. I have been told I must not mention gossip at my own table, which seems an unreasonable tyranny. If people did not wish to be discussed, they would behave less interestingly. A ripple of amusement moved along the guests. Cecily kept her eyes on her glass. Lady Beatrice touched the stem of her own, the smallest signal of satisfaction. A gentleman near the foot of the table unfolded a printed sheet. Then we must at least admire the wit of the town, he said. There is a paragraph everyone quotes today. Marianne lowered her lashes. Surely not at dinner. Oh, it's harmless, Mrs. Calverton said. Most cruelty is when printed small. Gideon's hand stilled beside his plate. Cecily saw it because she was trying not to look at him. The gentleman cleared his throat and read with theatrical lightness. A certain young lady, poor in portion but rich in invention, has discovered that pity may be made to dance if wrapped in a torn glove. A wounded title, a public hand, and a little practiced softness may yet accomplish what no dowry could secure. Silence followed, not because the words shocked anyone, but because everyone wished to see whether Cecily would bleed politely. Heat rose beneath her skin. The table blurred at the edges. She heard a fork set down. She heard Marianne's faint breath of amusement. She heard Lady Beatrice sigh as if grieved by what she had secretly watered. How tiresome, Lady Beatrice said. I had hoped the matter would fade. Cecily, my dear, you must see how easily kind impulses may be misunderstood. Cecily lifted her eyes. I see how easily they may be rewritten. A few faces turned. Marianne leaned forward. You must not blame people for drawing conclusions. They only know what they see. They saw a dance. They saw you choose a moment. Gideon spoke then, quiet and exact. Lady Cecily did not choose the cruelty that preceded it. Marianne's smile did not move. I didn't say she did, Your Grace. No. You implied it. Implication is useful when courage fails. Mrs. Calverton gave a delighted little gasp and hid it behind her napkin. Lady Beatrice's face softened into sorrow. Your Grace is naturally protective, but I fear protection may worsen the talk. A young lady in Cecily's situation must be careful. She has always had a lively imagination. Cecily felt the trap tightening. Her situation. Her imagination. Her dependence. Lady Beatrice never needed to accuse directly. She simply placed weakness on the table and waited for others to season it. Marianne looked toward the footman near the sideboard. He stepped forward with a small folded paper on a salver. Cecily's stomach turned cold. The movement had been arranged. Aunt, Marianne said, sounding reluctant enough to convince fools, perhaps it is kinder not to mention it. Lady Beatrice closed her eyes briefly. If there is something that may end this unfortunate speculation, it must be faced. The paper came to her. She did not open it at once. She let the table look. Gideon's gaze sharpened. What is that? Lady Beatrice's hand trembled with perfect art. A foolish thing. A note said to be in Cecily's hand. I had hoped it was merely nonsense. Cecily could not breathe. What note? Marianne looked at her with shining pity. You needn't pretend, Cecily. It only makes it worse. I am not pretending. Then you will not object if Aunt reads it. Gideon's voice cut through the room before Lady Beatrice could unfold the paper. She will object if she chooses. Every eye turned to him. He did not raise his voice. Rank did the raising for him. Cecily looked at the folded paper. A strange calm came over her, thin but real. If she refused, they would call it proof. If she allowed it, they would enjoy the wound. Both roads had been prepared by others. She would have to make a third. Let it be read, she said. Gideon's eyes moved to her. The protest in them was restrained, but not absent. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not rescue. Not yet. Lady Beatrice unfolded the page. It pains me, she murmured. Then she read. By tomorrow, London will know he danced with me. A damaged duke is still a duke, and pity will do what beauty could not. If I play the part well, he may feel obliged to call, and then even Aunt Beatrice will have to admit I am not useless. A sound moved around the table. Not outrage. Appetite. Cecily remained still. Inside, something had cracked cleanly, not from guilt, but from recognition. The letter was false, but it had been made from words thrown at her in private. Useless. Pity. Beauty. Damaged. Someone had gathered the household's cruelties and dressed them in her hand. Well. Marianne whispered. Haven't you anything to say? Cecily looked at the paper, then at Lady Beatrice. Yes. Her voice was low, so the room had to quiet itself to hear. Is kindness only respectable when it comes from someone rich? The question did what tears could not have done. It stopped the table. Lady Beatrice's lips parted. Marianne blinked. Mrs. Calverton lowered her fork. Cecily continued before fear returned. If a wealthy lady had offered His Grace her hand, you would have called it courage. If a beauty had done it, you would have called it charm. Because I have neither fortune nor permission, you call it strategy. She turned to the guests, not pleading, simply refusing to bend. That says less about my heart than it does about the price you place upon decency. No one spoke. Gideon's face had gone very still. Cecily saw approval there, and something more painful than approval. Respect. Lady Beatrice recovered first. An elegant speech does not answer the letter. No, Cecily said. The handwriting will answer it. Gideon extended his hand. The letter must be preserved. Lady Beatrice hesitated. It was brief, but everyone saw it. Naturally. She passed it down, but Marianne's fingers twitched as though she wished to snatch it back. Gideon took it by the edge and looked once at the writing. This does not match the note Lady Cecily sent accepting the opera invitation. Marianne laughed too quickly. Women alter their hands for privacy all the time, don't they? Do they? Gideon asked. How practiced of you to know. Colour flooded Marianne's cheeks. Lady Beatrice stood. This has gone far enough. Cecily stood as well. Her chair made a soft scrape against the floor. For once, I agree. Lady Beatrice's eyes warned her to sit. Cecily did not. I will not remain at a table where my character is served for entertainment between courses. Mrs. Calverton looked half scandalized and half thrilled. Gideon began to rise, but Cecily stopped him with a glance. She needed to leave by her own strength, or they would say he carried her from the truth. She curtsied to the hostess. Mrs. Calverton. Then to the table. Good evening. She walked toward the door with every eye following the back of her gown. Her hands shook only after she reached the hall, beyond the candles, beyond the silver, beyond the faces hungry for ruin. Behind her, Gideon's voice was clear and cold. No one is to damage that letter, misplace it, or quote it as truth until its origin is known. Lady Beatrice answered something too soft to hear. Cecily did not turn back. She kept walking. She had spoken. She had not been saved. She had not been silent. But as a footman brought her shawl and she stepped into the cooler air of the entrance hall, she understood that dignity could still hurt like grief. The door to the dining room remained open behind her, and Gideon's final words followed her out like a vowment for the whole room. Find the true Westmere letter, he said to someone, perhaps Lord Harrington, perhaps his own man waiting beyond the hall. Before the false one buries her? For 3 days after Mrs. Calverton's dinner, his Grace did not call. The first day, Cecily told herself that a duke's silence meant nothing she had any right to measure. The second day, London measured it for her. By noon, 2 calling cards had been left for Lady Beatrice and none for Cecily, though both ladies who sent them had written notes long enough to suggest concern and sharp enough to draw blood. By tea, Marianne had received a visitor who spoke of the Duke's absence with lowered lashes and a satisfied mouth. By the third morning, even the servants moved more softly around Cecily, as if scandal were an illness and they feared catching it from the air near her chair. Gideon Vale had defended her before 30 witnesses. Then he had vanished. Cecily hated herself for feeling the loss of him. She had known him for little more than a handful of conversations, a dance, an opera, one steady look across a dinner table built for her disgrace. Yet there was a particular cruelty in being seen and then returned to darkness. Before him, invisibility had been familiar. After him, it felt like punishment. Lady Beatrice understood that better than anyone. She waited until breakfast on the third day, when rain blurred the window panes and the house smelled faintly of damp wool and extinguished candles, before placing a folded letter beside Cecily's plate. Mrs. Pember writes again, she said. Marianne stirred chocolate without looking up. Bath is very pretty in bad weather, I'm told. Cecily did not touch the letter. I was not aware Mrs. Pember had written to me. She wrote to me, Lady Beatrice said. Naturally. Arrangements concerning you are not best made by you. The sentence was delivered so smoothly that Marianne smiled into her cup. Cecily looked at the grey morning beyond the glass. A carriage passed in the street, wheels hissing through wet mud. For one impossible second, she imagined it bearing the Alderwick crest. It did not. What arrangements? You will go to Bath for a little while. Mrs. Pember requires a companion of gentle birth and quiet habits. You require distance from London. Because of a forged letter. Lady Beatrice's eyes lifted. Because of a public disturbance attached to your name. Not attached by me. Names are not always damaged by their owners. They remain damaged all the same. Marianne set down her spoon. Aunt is being kind. Truly, Cecily, you should be grateful she hasn't sent you somewhere worse. Cecily turned to her. Worse than being sent away because someone lied. Marianne's expression flickered. You do like making yourself tragic. No. Other people have been generous enough to do that for me. Lady Beatrice's palm came down on the table, not loudly, but with enough force to end Marianne's smile. You will not speak in this tone beneath my roof. Beneath my roof. The phrase had followed Cecily for years. It was the answer to every question, the lock on every drawer, the hand over every letter. Beneath my roof, she had eaten food she was made to feel she had stolen. Beneath my roof, she had worn gowns altered from Marianne's discards and been told she should feel honored by the silk. Beneath my roof, her father's name had become a subject to avoid because avoidance suited the woman who held the keys. Cecily looked down at the letter. When do you intend to send me? The day after tomorrow if weather allows. Earlier if gossip worsens. And if His Grace calls. Marianne laughed before Lady Beatrice could answer. Do you still expect him? The kindness in the question was its sharpest edge. Cecily felt heat rise to her face and despised it. Lady Beatrice folded her hands. His Grace has had time to reconsider the wisdom of entangling himself in a young lady's unfortunate confusion. I would advise you to accept silence for what it is. Cecily stood. Her chair scraped the floor. And what is it? Instruction. No, Cecily said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. It is absence. You are the one making it instruction. Lady Beatrice rose as well. You will go to your room and consider whether pride is worth homelessness. Cecily looked at her aunt, then at Marianne, then at the breakfast table arranged with china, cream, sugar, and threats. I have considered it every day of my life here. She left before either woman could answer. She did not go to her room. Not at first. She went to the little back sitting room that had once been used for household accounts before Lady Beatrice decided it was too shabby for guests and too cold for comfort. The room smelled of dust, ink, and old paper. Cecily had been sent there often to mend hems or copy invitations because no one wished to hear her needle move in the drawing room. A locked cabinet stood against the inner wall. She had passed it for years without touching it. That morning, the cabinet seemed to look back. The key was not in the lock, of course. Lady Beatrice was careless with cruelty but never with objects. Cecily turned away, then stopped. On the writing table lay a tray of papers waiting to be sorted, household accounts mixed with old correspondence. A corner of scorched paper showed beneath a bundle tied in faded green ribbon. It was not much. Merely a darkened edge, as if someone had once held it too close to flame and changed her mind too late. Cecily drew it free. The paper was brittle and browned along one side. Most of the writing had been destroyed, but the remaining line struck her with such force she had to sit. My dearest C, should anyone tell you that you are dependent upon charity, remember this. Your portion is not charity. It was settled with love, and the instruction is sealed until you are of age or until your marriage settlement is prepared. Trust no one who benefits from your ignorance. The signature had burned away after the first stroke of an Eve Redmond. Her father. Cecily pressed the paper flat with trembling fingers. Not charity. Not charity. The words entered her like breath after years underwater. She read them again until they blurred. Lady Beatrice had not sheltered her from confusion. Lady Beatrice had made confusion useful. Somewhere in the house, a bell rang. Voices moved in the hall. Cecily folded the half-burned note with care and looked around for a place to hide it. Her pocket was too obvious. Her work basket might be searched. Her jewel box contained nothing but a cracked brooch and one ribbon, but Lady Beatrice knew that too. Then she thought of the torn ivory glove. The old pair had been locked away in a drawer in the dressing room, but Lady Beatrice had not troubled to take the key because she believed humiliation itself was enough to keep Cecily from touching them. Cecily went upstairs without haste, because haste would betray her. In her chamber, she opened the drawer and found the gloves folded beneath a handkerchief. The torn seam gaped like a small mouth. She slipped the burned note inside the glove, deep against the palm, and held it there. The leather that had exposed her now protected the only proof that her life had not always been meant to belong to others. A knock came at the door. Cecily closed the drawer. Yes? Marianne entered without waiting. Her face was bright with triumph barely disguised as concern. Aunt says you are to begin sorting what you will take to Bath. Nothing too fine. Mrs. Pember dislikes vanity. How fortunate. I have very little to offend her. Marianne glanced around the room. You should not be angry with us. If the Duke meant to defend you further, he would have come. Cecily looked at her cousin and understood, suddenly, that Marianne did not know whether the letter had ruined Cecily. She only needed Cecily to believe it had. Perhaps. Perhaps? Perhaps his silence means what you hope. Perhaps it means something else. Marianne's eyes narrowed. You think too well of yourself. No, Cecily said. I am only beginning to think at all. That frightened Marianne more than defiance would have. Cecily saw it before her cousin turned away. When the door closed, Cecily took out the glove again and held it against her heart for one stolen breath. She did not know where Gideon was. She did not know whether his absence was strategy, regret, or abandonment. She knew only that waiting for him had become another room in which others could lock her. By nightfall, the rain had stopped. In another part of London, lamps burned late in Mr. Harbury's office while Gideon Vale stood over a table scattered with copied signatures, paper samples, and unanswered notes. He had not called at Ellsworth House because every instinct told him that his visible attention had made Cecily a target. He had sent men to paper merchants, questioned a clerk who remembered Marianne's maid, and found the solicitor who had once handled Westmere drafts. It was action. It was purpose. It was also silence. He saw that too late. Your Grace, Mr. Harbury said carefully, if Lady Cecily is not told what is being done, she may believe nothing is being done at all. Gideon looked at the forged letter lying beneath a weight of brass. I know. He thought of Cecily at the dinner table, refusing to be rescued before she had spoken. He thought of her torn glove and the thread still folded in his pocket. Protection without trust. That was what he had given her. A cleaner cage. His jaw tightened. Had the carriage brought round at first light? To Ellsworth House. Yes, Gideon said. Before Lady Beatrice decides absence is permission. At dawn, Cecily folded the torn ivory glove into the bottom of her reticule and understood that a woman could carry an entire life in something small enough to hide beneath a handkerchief. The half-burned note lay inside the glove, protected by the same torn leather that London had mocked, and the irony steadied her more than sleep would have done. She had not slept. She had listened through the night to the house settling around her, to carriage wheels passing in the wet street, to Marianne laughing once behind a closed door as if the world still belonged to those who could afford amusement. By morning, the sky over London had cleared into a pale, pitiless grey. Cecily dressed without calling her maid, because a servant might be questioned, and she would not purchase escape with another woman's trouble. She chose her plain walking gown, the one Lady Beatrice disliked because it made no attempt to flatter anyone's generosity. Then she opened the little box on her dressing table and took out every borrowed ornament she had been allowed to wear under supervision. The pearl drops from Marianne's old set. The garnet brooch Lady Beatrice had called more than you require, but less than you might wish. The narrow shawl lent for evening calls because Cecily's own was too faded for public mercy. She placed each item on the bed with care. Not anger. Care. They had never been gifts. They were receipts disguised as kindness. A knock sounded. Lady Beatrice entered before Cecily answered, as she always did when she wished to remind Cecily that privacy was only granted to people with power. Marianne followed in a morning gown of rose muslin, bright-eyed despite the early hour. You are not packed, Lady Beatrice said. Her gaze moved from the open trunk to the ornaments laid out on the coverlet. What is this? What belongs to you? Cecily closed the box. I thought it best to return everything before any arrangements are made. Marianne glanced at the shawl and laughed softly. How dramatic. Aunt, she means to perform dignity over a few old trinkets. No, Cecily said. I mean to be accurate. Lady Beatrice's expression hardened by a degree. Accuracy would require you to admit that you have been sheltered in this house, clothed in this house, fed in this house, and introduced into society through this house. Accuracy would also require mentioning why I had no access to what my father left for me. The room changed. Marianne's amusement faltered. Lady Beatrice did not look toward the drawer where the glove had been kept, but Cecily saw the instinct move through her. The search had not begun yet. Good. You have been reading things you do not understand, Lady Beatrice said. I found enough to understand one matter clearly. Cecily stood beside the bed, her reticule hanging from her wrist. My dependence has been useful to you. Your dependence has been managed by me. Those are not the same. Marianne stepped forward. You are being hateful. After everything Aunt has done, you stand here because a scarred duke looked at you twice and now you think yourself important. Cecily turned to her cousin. I do not think myself important because of the duke. Her voice did not rise. I think I was always a person, and I am ashamed it took this long to say so aloud. Marianne's face flushed. Lady Beatrice moved between them with the smooth authority of a woman accustomed to ending scenes before truth-gathered witnesses. You will apologize to Marianne for your conduct. You will write to Mrs. Calverton expressing regret for your behavior at dinner. You will leave for Bath tomorrow morning, and you will do so quietly enough that I may still salvage what remains of your name. Cecily looked at the woman who had ruled her days for years. She had expected rage to come when she finally refused. Instead, what rose inside her was sorrow, clean and deep. How many times had she mistaken a locked door for a roof? No, Lady Beatrice blinked once. I beg your pardon. No, the word was smaller than the room and stronger than every command inside it. I will not apologize for being lied about. I will not go to Bath as punishment for a forgery. I will not stay under a roof where gratitude means silence and charity means control. Marianne whispered, You can't leave. Cecily looked at her. I can. Where would you go? Lady Beatrice asked. It was not curiosity. It was the question that had kept Cecily obedient for years. Cecily lifted her chin. To someone who looked at me as if she recognized my mother. For the first time that morning, Lady Beatrice's composure cracked. Lady Octavia Wraxhall has no concern in this. Then she may refuse me at her door. Cecily picked up her gloves, not the torn pair, but the plain grey ones on the chair. The torn glove remained hidden in the reticule. That will be her choice. Staying here will not be mine. Lady Beatrice's voice dropped. If you walk out of this house, do not expect to walk back into it. Cecily paused at the threshold. She looked once at the room that had held her bed, her mending, her small obedience, and the fear she had mistaken for prudence. I do not expect to. She descended the stairs before her courage could ask how far it was expected to carry her. No carriage had been ordered for her? Of course not. A woman who left without permission was not provided with wheels. The footman in the hall stared at her reticule, then at her face, then lowered his eyes. Cecily gave him no explanation. She stepped into the morning air and walked. Lady Octavia Wraxhall's house stood in a quieter part of Mayfair, not ostentatious, but immovable in the way of old families who did not need fresh paint to announce importance. By the time Cecily reached it, her shoes were damp from the pavement, her fingers ached from gripping the reticule, and the world had become very large. She gave her card to the footman and waited in an entrance hall that smelled faintly of beeswax and lavender. It was the longest minute of her life. Then Lady Octavia herself appeared at the top of the stairs. She wore pearl grey again, with no ornament except a mourning ring. Her gaze took in Cecily's plain gown, pale face, and the reticule held too tightly at her side. Lady Cecily Arundel, she said. I wondered how long it would take you. Cecily's throat closed. Then you know why I have come. I know enough to ask whether you came freely. Yes. And whether you can return safely. Cecily swallowed. No, Lady Octavia descended the last step. Then you will come in. No exclamation. No flurry. No pity. Only decision. Cecily followed her into a small drawing room where the fire had already been lit and the chairs were placed for conversation rather than display. A maid brought tea and withdrew. Only then did Cecily open her reticule and remove the torn glove. Lady Octavia's face did not change when Cecily drew out the half-burned note. She read the surviving lines once. Then again. Your mother feared this, she said. Cecily gripped the edge of her chair. You knew my mother. I knew her before she married Westmere. She wrote to me shortly before she died, not in detail, but with unease. She said if ever you seemed to vanish into another household, I was to remember that Westmere had intended more for you than dependence. Lady Octavia crossed to a writing desk, opened a narrow drawer, and removed an old calling card, yellowed at the edges. This was enclosed. Cecily took it. The name engraved upon it was not the solicitor Lady Beatrice had mentioned over the years. It was another name entirely. Mr. Harbury's former partner, now retired to Lincoln's Inn. "Why did you not come sooner?" Cecily asked, not accusing, only aching. Lady Octavia's gaze softened without becoming gentle enough to wound. "Because society trains women to mistake silence for contentment. You were always presented as grateful, quiet, and cared for. I saw your glove at Harrington House and knew I had been a fool." Cecily looked down. The torn leather lay between them like witness and wound. "I did not know where else to go." That is often the first honest sentence of freedom. A commotion sounded faintly in the hall. A man's voice. The footman's answer. Cecily stiffened. Lady Octavia rose. "You are not required to see anyone you do not choose." The door opened a moment later, and Gideon Vale stood beyond it, his hat in hand, rain dark on the shoulders of his coat though the morning had cleared. He looked first at Lady Octavia, then at Cecily, and the relief that crossed his scarred face was so brief that only someone watching for pain would have seen it. "Lady Cecily," he said. "I went to Ellsworth House. Lady Beatrice informed me you had behaved irrationally and left without sense." Cecily stood slowly. "And did you believe her?" "No," the answer came at once. He stepped no closer. "But I believed, too late, that my silence helped her say it." The room held its breath. Cecily felt the glove in her hand, the note inside it, the fear behind her, and the uncertain road ahead. Gideon bowed his head, not as a duke granting mercy, but as a man acknowledging harm. "I was wrong to protect you without trusting you." The apology remained in the room after Gideon spoke it, quieter than the fire and heavier than any accusation. Cecily had heard men apologize before. They usually did it as if returning a borrowed fan, with enough elegance to suggest the matter should now be considered closed. Gideon did not. He stood near Lady Octavia's drawing-room door with his hat still in one hand, rain-dark coat unbuttoned, scar pale beneath the morning light, and he looked not at Lady Octavia for approval, not at the torn glove on the table for evidence, but at Cecily. He waited as though her answer mattered more than his discomfort. That was why she did not give it quickly. "You were wrong," she said. The words cost her less than she had feared and more than she expected. Gideon inclined his head. "Yes. You thought silence would protect me. I thought my visible attention had made you a target." It had. His eyes flickered. "Then I was not entirely mistaken." "No," Cecily said. "That is what makes it worse." Lady Octavia, seated near the writing desk, watched them with the stillness of a woman who understood when not to rescue either party from honesty. The maid had removed the tea tray. The door remained open by a few inches, proper enough to keep the world from misunderstanding what it would eagerly have ruined. Cecily stood beside the small table where the torn ivory glove lay with her father's half-burnt note. The glove looked poor against Lady Octavia's polished wood, but no longer shameful. It had become a witness. Gideon's gaze fell to it only once. "I have spent years learning to draw danger toward myself," he said. It seemed cleaner than letting it find others. "I am not a battlefield, Your Grace." His face changed at that. "Not much." "Enough." "No," he said. "You are not. And I am not a parcel to be removed from danger without being told where I am being carried. No, and I am not so fragile that truth must be kept from me until men decide it is safe." This time he did not answer at once. Cecily felt the heat in her face but refused to look away. Lady Beatrice had trained her to fear directness. Marianne had trained her to expect mockery after every honest sentence. Gideon gave her neither. He accepted the blow because it was just. "I failed you there," he said. "I did not mean to." Meaning well does not undo the result. No. It doesn't. The contraction, plain and human, startled her more than a formal admission would have. For the first time since he entered, he looked tired. Not weak. Tired, as if command itself had become a coat he had worn too long. "Mr. Harbury has found more," he said. "Not all, but enough to prove the forged letter did not come from you. The paper was bought through a stationer used by Lady Marianne's maid." The phrasing matches gossip already planted before Mrs. Calverton's dinner. And the retired partner named on Lady Octavia's card confirms that your father prepared an instruction concerning a protected portion. Cecily's fingers closed around the back of the chair. Protected from whom? From any guardian who might profit by delay. Lady Octavia made a low sound, not surprise, but disgust refined by age. Cecily looked at the half-burned note. Your portion is not charity. She had repeated the words so often in her mind that they had begun to feel both miraculous and cruel. So Lady Beatrice knew. Gideon did not soften the answer. I believe she knew enough. The room seemed to tilt toward the old years. Every gown accepted with humiliation. Every coin accounted for. Every letter opened. Every mention of gratitude. Cecily pressed her palm against the chair until the wood edge steadied her. If you have proof, why not confront her at once? Because private confrontation would allow her to deny publicly. Lady Octavia nodded once. And because she has lived too long by arranging rooms before others enter them. This time, she must enter one arranged by someone else. Cecily looked from Lady Octavia to Gideon. You have made a plan. Gideon's silence answered before he did. Lady Octavia has agreed to host a morning gathering. Enough witnesses to make denial difficult. Enough rank to make slander costly. And I was to be told after it was settled. His gaze met hers. The old Gideon might have defended the necessity. This one stopped. I came to ask. Not to inform. The distinction moved through Cecily slowly. She wanted to trust it. That frightened her. Trust was far more dangerous than suspicion because it opened doors from the inside. Ask what? Whether you wish to proceed. Whether you wish me present. Whether you want Mr. Harbury to speak first, or Lady Octavia, or no one until you choose. His hand tightened once around his hat. Whether I may stand beside you. Cecily's throat ached. Beside. Not before. Not over. Not as owner of the truth because he had found part of it. She looked at the torn glove. The damaged seam had been mocked, hidden, taken away, and recovered. Now it lay open, holding her father's words. If I go into that room, she said, I go as myself. Not as your rescued lady. Yes. If Lady Beatrice speaks against me, I answer her. Yes. If Marianne lies, I will not be expected to faint, weep, or wait prettily while gentlemen decide my character. Something like pain crossed his face, gone almost at once. No, and if you use your rank, she said, you use it after I have spoken, not instead of me. Gideon bowed his head. I give you my word. Lady Octavia's eyes warmed with approval she did not voice. Cecily drew a breath that felt almost like stepping into cold air. Then I will go. Gideon looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The fire settled. A carriage passed in the street. Somewhere in the house, a clock marked the quarter hour. There is one more matter, Lady Octavia said. Cecily turned. Lady Octavia held a small card between two fingers. Lady Marianne has already begun a new whisper. She claims your arrival here was improper and that I received you out of pity after you returned from Ellsworth House. Cecily almost laughed. It came out as a breath. I walked out. Yes, Lady Octavia said. That is precisely why she must make it sound as if you were thrown. Gideon's expression hardened. Then the gathering must be soon. Tomorrow, Lady Octavia said. At noon. I have sent cards to Lady Harrington, Mrs. Calverton, Lady Jersey's niece, and two women who dislike me too much to ignore an opportunity to see whether I am wrong. That is efficient, Gideon said. It is old age, Lady Octavia replied. One stops wasting invitations on cowards. Despite everything, Cecily smiled. It was small, but it belonged to her. Gideon saw it and looked away with the restraint of a man refusing to take more from a moment than had been offered. That, more than any speech, loosened something in her chest. He did not reach for her hand. He looked at the glove instead. May I? He asked. Cecily understood without asking. She lifted the torn glove from the table and placed it across her palm, the half-burned note still tucked inside. Then she held it out. He touched only the torn edge, not her fingers, not the skin beneath the new glove she wore. His restraint was exact, almost reverent. "They thought this made you small," he said. "It shows where they were careless. With leather. With you." Cecily looked down. The words were too simple to hide from. "Do not make me braver than I am. I would not dare." This time, the almost smile reached both of them. For one suspended instant, the room held no Lady Beatrice, no forged letter, no gossip waiting beyond the door. Only a torn glove between two people who had both been turned into stories by others and were, cautiously, learning to speak in their own voices. Then Lady Octavia rose and went to her desk. Sentiment later. Strategy now. Gideon released the glove at once. Cecily folded it around the note and set it back upon the table. Lady Octavia drew out a sheet of thick paper and dipped her pen. "We shall invite Lady Beatrice Ellsworth with such warmth that refusing will look like fear. We shall invite Lady Marianne with such courtesy that attending will feel like victory. We shall let her bring whatever evidence she believes will ruin you." Cecily felt the old fear stir, but it no longer filled the whole room. "And if the room believes her first?" Gideon answered, not gently, but truly. "Then we continue until truth has had its turn." Cecily looked at him. "You are very certain truth wins?" "No," he said. "I am certain it loses when left undefended." Lady Octavia's pen moved across the page. Outside, London prepared another whisper. Inside, Cecily stood between a duke who had admitted his mistake and a widow who had opened her door, with her father's damaged note wrapped inside a damaged glove. She was still afraid. But fear no longer sounded like instruction. It sounded like a warning bell she was finally allowed to answer. By noon the next day, Lady Octavia Wraxhall's drawing room had become the most dangerous place in Mayfair because nothing in it appeared dangerous at all. There were no raised voices, no locked doors, no menacing gestures for the frightened to name afterward. There were only polished tables, porcelain cups, a moderate fire, spring light falling through tall windows, and enough titled witnesses seated beneath Lady Octavia's pale green walls to make a lie hesitate before crossing the carpet. Cecily stood near the center of the room with the torn ivory glove folded in her left hand and her father's half-burned note tucked safely inside it. She wore a gown of soft grey that Lady Octavia had supplied without calling it charity. It was not fashionable enough to turn her into a new woman. That was why Cecily had chosen it. She did not want to seem transformed. She wanted to be believed as herself. Lady Octavia sat by the writing desk as if the entire gathering had been arranged for tea and mild complaint. Mrs. Calverton had come because curiosity was stronger than caution. Lady Harrington had come because she had seen the first dance and knew her own ballroom had become part of the story. Two older women of consequence sat near the fire, faces composed, fans still. Mr. Harbury waited by the bookcase with a sealed packet resting on a small table beside him. Gideon Vale stood near the mantel, not close enough to claim Cecily, not far enough to abandon her. When Cecily had entered, he had bowed, and nothing more. Somehow that restraint gave her greater strength than any dramatic vow could have done. He had promised to stand beside her. He was keeping the promise by not taking the room from her. The door opened at 10 minutes after noon, which meant Lady Beatrice Ellsworth had chosen delay as her first weapon. She entered in deep violet satin with Marianne at her side, both dressed as if attending a triumph disguised as an obligation. Lady Beatrice's face held the wounded dignity of a woman prepared to forgive those who had wronged her. Marianne looked lovely, pale, and eager. Her eyes went first to Gideon, then to Cecily's hands. She saw the glove. Her mouth tightened. Lady Octavia rose just enough to honor rank without surrendering command of her own house. "Lady Beatrice, how good of you to come." "I could hardly refuse such an earnest invitation," Lady Beatrice replied. "Especially when it concerns my poor niece's welfare." Cecily felt the phrase move through the room. My poor niece. A chain made of silk. Lady Octavia gestured to chairs. "Then we are fortunate to have you. Sit, if you please." Lady Beatrice Saturday. Marianne took the chair beside her, arranging her skirts with the delicate annoyance of someone who had expected an audience to favor her beauty more immediately. Gideon did not move. Lady Beatrice acknowledged him with a curtsy of the head. "Your Grace. I am relieved to see you here. Perhaps now this distressing matter may be ended with proper understanding." "That depends upon the understanding," Gideon said. Marianne's smile fluttered. "How solemn everyone is. One would think Cecily had been tried at the Old Bailey instead of merely embarrassed by her own imprudence." A faint chill passed through the room. Cecily did not look at Gideon. She did not need to. She stepped forward before anyone else could shape the silence. "Lady Marianne, you brought a letter to Mrs. Calverton's dinner." Marianne blinked, clearly unprepared for Cecily to begin. "Aunt brought it. You arranged for it to appear." Lady Beatrice's fan opened. "Cecily, you are overwrought. Accusations will not help you. Then let us avoid accusation." Cecily held Marianne's gaze. "Read it aloud." The room shifted. Mrs. Calverton leaned forward before remembering dignity and leaning back again. Marianne gave a small laugh. "Why would I do that?" "Because you believed it proved my character before 30 dinner guests. If it had power there, it should survive this room." Lady Beatrice's voice softened. "My dear, no one wishes to humiliate you further." "That is not true," Cecily said. The honesty of it made Lady Harrington's fan pause. Cecily turned slightly, including the room, but not pleading with it. "Some people have wished precisely that. I am tired of assisting them by pretending otherwise." Marianne's cheeks colored. "You're making yourself ridiculous. Then the letter should rescue you from the effort of saying so." Gideon's gaze remained on Cecily. He did not speak. The silence he gave her was not abandonment this time. It was space. Lady Beatrice reached into her reticule and withdrew the folded paper as if doing so pained her. "Very well. Since Cecily insists upon prolonging an unhappy spectacle." She handed it to Marianne. "Read, if you must." Marianne took it with visible reluctance that Cecily no longer believed. Her voice trembled prettily at first, then grew steadier as she found pleasure in the words. "By tomorrow, London will know he danced with me. A damaged duke is still a duke, and pity will do what beauty could not. If I play the part well, he may feel obliged to call, and then even Aunt Beatrice will have to admit I am not useless." No one spoke when she finished. The false words seemed uglier in daylight than they had at dinner. Perhaps because there was no clatter of plates to soften them. Perhaps because Cecily remained standing. "That," Lady Beatrice said, "is why I acted as I did. Not from cruelty, but concern. Cecily has been susceptible to romantic imagination since girlhood. I feared what ambition might do to a young lady without fortune." "Without fortune," Lady Octavia repeated mildly. Lady Beatrice's eyes flickered toward her. "You know our circumstances have not allowed extravagance." "I know many circumstances have been arranged by those who benefit from them," Lady Octavia said. Cecily placed the torn ivory glove on the small table before her. It lay there, pale and damaged, no longer hidden in a drawer or tucked beneath her palm. Lady Beatrice stared at it as if Cecily had brought something indecent into the room. "What is the meaning of this?" she asked. Cecily opened the glove and drew out the half-burned note. "This glove is not proof of ambition. It is proof of what I was told to hide." Marianne's eyes widened. Lady Beatrice went utterly still. Cecily unfolded the burned paper with careful fingers. "This is in my father's hand. It says my portion was not charity. It says the instruction was sealed. It says I was not to trust anyone who benefited from my ignorance." The words were not loud, but they reached every chair. Lady Harrington covered her mouth. Mrs. Calverton's expression sharpened into something less frivolous. Lady Beatrice rose. "That fragment proves nothing except that you have been rummaging through private household papers." Cecily looked at her. "My father's words about my future are not your private property. You ungrateful girl." There it was. Not concern. Not kindness. The naked word beneath years of polish. Cecily felt it strike, and for once it did not enter her. Gratitude for shelter does not require surrendering truth. Marianne stood as well. You don't even know what truth is. You want to believe Aunt wronged you because it makes you interesting. Cecily turned to her. No. I want to know who wrote the letter you just read. Marianne's mouth opened, then closed. Gideon moved at last, only one step. Mr. Harbury has preserved the original. He has also obtained comparisons of Lady Cecily's hand, the paper used, and the stationer's record. Lady Beatrice's fan snapped shut. A solicitor at a tea gathering, Your Grace? How theatrical. Lady Octavia smiled. No more theatrical than forged sentiment at a dinner table. Mr. Harbury approached the small table and set down the sealed packet. There is also the matter of the late Earl of Westmere's sealed instruction, which I hold unopened except in the presence of witnesses. Lady Beatrice's face changed so quickly that only Cecily, who had studied her for survival, saw fear before outrage covered it. You have no right. Mr. Harbury bowed. On the contrary, my lady, I have precisely the right requested by the late Earl and confirmed by his retired solicitor. Cecily placed her hand beside the torn glove. It did not tremble. Marianne whispered, Aunt. Lady Beatrice did not answer. Gideon's eyes met Cecily's, and in them she saw the question he had promised to ask without words. Now? She drew a breath. Open it, she said. Mr. Harbury broke the seal. The sound of the seal breaking seemed louder than any shout could have been. It cracked beneath Mr. Harbury's knife, small and final, and every person in Lady Octavia Wraxhall's drawing room leaned toward the table without meaning to move at all. Cecily kept her hand beside the torn glove. She did not touch it. If she did, she feared she might cling to it like a child, and she had not come this far to look like a child before those who had profited from treating her as one. Mr. Harbury unfolded the paper with the care due to a dead man's last act of protection. His voice, when he began, was dry, professional, and devastating. To be held in trust for my daughter, Lady Cecily Arundel, until she reaches her majority or until such time as a marriage settlement may be prepared for her separate use. No guardian, relation, or temporary custodian is to dispose of, delay, obscure, or represent this portion as charity. My daughter is to be maintained with dignity appropriate to her birth, and no claim of obligation shall be made against her for receiving what is already her own. The room did not breathe. Cecily heard every word as if it crossed a great distance before reaching her. Her daughter. Her portion. Her own. Not charity. Not inconvenience. Not kindness measured by Lady Beatrice's patience. Mr. Harbury continued, but the rest blurred around the edges. There were sums named, trustees named, instructions for correspondence, a reference to Lady Octavia Wraxhall as a person to be consulted should irregularity arise. Each sentence removed a stone from a wall Cecily had lived behind so long she had mistaken it for weather. Lady Beatrice stood rigid, one hand on the back of her chair. This is absurd, she said when Mr. Harbury finished. If such a document existed, it should have been produced years ago. Lady Octavia looked at her over the rim of her spectacles. It did exist. That is the trouble with documents one tries to bury. They have a vulgar habit of remaining written. A faint sound moved through the room. It might have been shock. It might have been satisfaction. Lady Beatrice's colour rose. I never buried anything. Westmere's affairs were confused. I acted as circumstances required. Cecily lifted her eyes to her aunt's face. You let me believe I lived on your charity. You did live in my house. With my own portion withheld. Managed. Hidden. The word left Cecily before fear could soften it. Lady Beatrice's fan snapped open, then shut again. You know nothing of management, ingratitude, or sacrifice. Do you imagine households maintain themselves on sentiment? Your father left disorder. I preserved respectability. You preserved control, Cecily said. The room held still around her. She had not planned those words. Perhaps truth did not always require planning. Sometimes it had waited so long that it knew its own route to the surface. Marianne rose, pale beneath her lovely colour. Aunt did what she had to do. Cecily, don't pretend you've suffered like some tragic heroine. You had gowns. You had food. You had introductions. Cecily turned to her cousin. I had reminders attached to each of them. Marianne's mouth tightened. Because you were always so proud. No. Because you were always so frightened that I might discover I had no reason to be beneath you. The strike landed. Marianne stepped back as though the sentence had taken the air from her. Lady Beatrice recovered first because long practice had made recovery her art. She pointed toward the forged letter still lying on the table. Whatever mistakes were made in old accounts, they do not alter Cecily's conduct. That letter remains. Her ambition remains. Her willingness to attach herself to his grace before all London remains. Gideon moved then. Only one step, but the room became aware of him in the way a room becomes aware of thunder before it breaks. No, he said. The letter does not remain as evidence against Lady Cecily. Mr. Harbury placed another sheet beside the first. The paper used for the false note was purchased 3 days before Mrs. Calverton's dinner from a stationer in Bond Street. The purchase was made through a maid in Lady Marianne's service. The same stationer supplied the envelopes used for certain anonymous paragraphs sent to 2 gossip sheets. Marianne's face went white. That proves nothing. It proves root, Mr. Harbury said. The handwriting proves more. It resembles Lady Cecily's only where a practiced imitator copied her visible letters. It fails in the private forms. Mrs. Calverton, whose appetite for scandal had been chastened into attention, looked sharply at Marianne. Private forms. Gideon answered without taking his eyes from Lady Beatrice. A person copying a hand copies what society sees. A person writing naturally reveals what no one thinks to imitate. Mr. Harbury placed a final small paper on the table. Lady Marianne's own note to the gossip writer includes the phrase "Pity will do what beauty could not." The same phrase appears in the forged letter. Marianne's hand flew to her throat. I didn't mean for it to become so serious. There it was. Not innocence. Not denial. A child's plea after the vase has already shattered. Lady Beatrice turned on her. Marianne. You said she was ruining everything, Marianne whispered. You said if people believed she trapped him, he would stay away. The room went utterly silent. Lady Beatrice's face emptied of all expression. Cecily looked at her aunt and saw, not a monster, but something more common and more terrible. A respectable woman who had chosen fear, debt, ambition, and pride so often that cruelty had become her household language. Gideon's voice cut through the silence. Lady Beatrice, you concealed Lady Cecily's portion, represented her rightful maintenance as charity, permitted a forgery to endanger her reputation, and attempted to remove her from London before inquiry could reach you. Lady Beatrice drew herself up. Your Grace may command soldiers and estates. You do not command my conscience. No, he said. I command my name, my house, and my invitations. So do the ladies in this room. Lady Octavia rose. Indeed we do. Lady Harrington stood next. Mrs. Calverton followed, slower but unmistakably. One by one, the older women of consequence withdrew their silent permission. It was not theatrical. It was worse. It was social death delivered with correct posture. Lady Octavia's voice was calm. Lady Beatrice, you will not bring Lady Marianne to my house again this season. I shall explain why to anyone whose invitation matters. Lady Harrington added, nor to mine. Mrs. Calverton looked pained by her own conscience, but she spoke. I will correct what was said at my table. Marianne sank back into her chair as if the stays of her gown had loosened. Lady Beatrice looked around and understood at last that the room had not been gathered to shame Cecily. It had been gathered to stop shaming her. Gideon turned to Mr. Harbury. Lady Cecily's portion will be secured according to the late Earl's instruction. If she ever chooses marriage, it will be settled for her separate use. Until then, it is not to be touched by Ellsworth hands. Mr. Harbury bowed. It shall be done. Cecily looked at Gideon then, and he looked back, not with triumph, not with possession, but with a humility that made her chest ache. I owe Lady Cecily another truth, he said. The room stilled again. When I withdrew after Mrs. Calverton's dinner, I told myself I was protecting her by investigating quietly. I was wrong. I left her to bear the appearance of abandonment while I comforted myself with purpose. I will not confuse protection with control again. Cecily felt the words move through her slowly. They did not repair everything, because real things rarely did at once. But they honored the wound instead of asking it to vanish. Gideon stepped nearer, still leaving proper distance between them, and bowed his head. Lady Cecily, I asked for your hand once in a ballroom after you offered it to me when no one else would. I ask for it now differently. Not to rescue your name. It stands without me. Not to answer gossip. Truth has answered it. I ask because I would be honored to stand beside you, if you freely choose it. No one spoke. Cecily looked at the torn glove on the table. The first time she had offered her hand, she had done it because she could not bear to watch a man made lonely by fear. Now she understood that courage had opened a door not only for him, but for herself. She looked at Lady Beatrice, who could no longer command her. She looked at Marianne, who could no longer define her. She looked at Lady Octavia, whose fierce eyes shone without tears. Then she looked at Gideon. If I give you my hand, she said, it will never be because I have nowhere else to place it. His voice was low. I wouldn't want it otherwise. And if I stand beside you, I remain myself. I would consider that the chief honor of my life. Cecily picked up the torn glove, folded it once around her father's note, and held it against her heart. Then, with her other hand, whole and steady, she offered him what society had once mocked. Gideon took it as he had in the ballroom, with reverence instead of claim. This time, no one in the room could mistake her gesture for desperation. It was choice. Lady Beatrice sat down as if her strength had left her. Marianne began to cry, softly and uselessly. Cecily did not feel cruel for failing to comfort her. Compassion did not require returning to the cage. Lady Octavia crossed the room and placed one hand lightly on Cecily's shoulder. There, she said. Now London may learn the difference between scandal and truth. Cecily looked once more at the sealed instruction, the forged letter, and the torn glove. All the small things used to diminish her had become evidence that she had survived. When she left Lady Octavia's drawing-room that afternoon, she did so beside the Duke of Alderwick, but not behind him. The street outside was bright with hard spring light. Carriages waited. Curtains shifted in neighbouring windows. London was watching, as it always watched. For the first time in Cecily's life, she did not lower her head to make watching easier for anyone else. 3 months after London learned the difference between scandal and truth, Lady Cecily Arundel arrived at Kestrelmere Park beneath a sky so wide and blue that it seemed impossible anyone had ever mistaken a drawing-room for the whole world. The carriage turned between long avenues of beech and elm, their leaves bright with early summer, while the great house rose ahead in warm grey stone, neither gaudy nor severe, but settled into the land as if it had been waiting through generations for the right footsteps to cross its threshold. Cecily sat beside Lady Octavia Wraxhall, her hands folded over the small travelling case on her lap, and tried to breathe like a woman arriving by choice rather than permission. Her settlement had been secured. Mr. Harbury had seen to it with the dry satisfaction of a man who preferred justice when it came properly stamped and witnessed. The portion her father had protected was now arranged for Cecily's separate use, untouched by Ellsworth hands, and entered into the marriage settlement with language Gideon had insisted be plain enough that no future relation could pretend not to understand it. Lady Beatrice Ellsworth had not been ruined in a theatrical way gossip like best. She had been reduced more painfully, by degrees. Invitations ceased arriving. Doors remained politely unavailable. Women who once praised her management now spoke of caution when her name arose. Marianne had been removed from London before the season ended, sent to a cousin in the country with enough trunks to preserve pride and too little admiration to feed it. Cecily had felt no triumph in either sentence. Triumph was too loud for what had been done. Relief was quieter. Relief lasted longer. "You are thinking of them," Lady Octavia said, not looking away from the window. Cecily smiled faintly. "You are alarmingly difficult to deceive. At my age, deception must be either excellent or brief. Most people offer neither. I was thinking that I do not hate them as much as I once feared I might." "Good. Hatred is an expensive tenant. Lady Octavia glanced at her. Do not confuse eviction with forgiveness. The carriage slowed. Footmen in Alderwick livery came down the steps, and beyond them stood Gideon Vale. He wore dark blue instead of black, a change so small most people would not have marked it, but Cecily did. His scar was still visible. His stillness was still there. Yet the sight of him before his own house changed something in the air. He looked less like a man enduring witness and more like a man allowing himself to be found. When the carriage door opened, he came forward and offered his hand first to Lady Octavia, who took it with queenly acceptance, then to Cecily. For a heartbeat, she remembered another hand offered beneath chandeliers, another silence, another room waiting to decide whether courage was foolish. This time, no one whispered. The household stood in ordered rows upon the steps, housekeeper, butler, footman, maids, gardeners farther back near the gravel sweep. Their attention was formal, but not cruel. Gideon's hand remained steady beneath hers. "Welcome to Kestrelmere," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace." His eyes warmed. "We are nearly past that." "Nearly," she said. "Not until the chapel makes you impossible to escape." One corner of his mouth moved. "I'm told escape remains possible, if one is determined. Then I shall decide after luncheon." Lady Octavia made a sound suspiciously like approval and swept ahead with the housekeeper. Cecily entered Kestrelmere Park beside Gideon, not behind him, and felt the hall receive her without asking what she had cost. Portraits lined the walls. Some faces were proud, some weary, some so powdered and ancestral that they appeared to have been born disapproving. Gideon paused beneath one of a young officer with laughing eyes. "My brother," he said. Cecily looked at the portrait, then at Gideon. The rumor that had once clung to him had been answered in its own way after Lady Octavia's gathering. Lord Harrington had spoken to men who knew the campaign. Mr. Harbury had found letters. The truth had not made the past painless. It had only made the lie less powerful. Gideon had not abandoned his brother. He had survived him, which society had somehow found easier to punish than understand. "He looks kind," Cecily said. "He was reckless." Gideon's voice softened. "And kind." He did not say more. He did not need to. She placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve for 1 second, in full view of the servants and Lady Octavia arguing cheerfully with the housekeeper overstairs. A touch of comfort, brief and proper. Gideon looked down at her hand as if it were a blessing he had not earned but meant to honor. Later, after luncheon, after rooms had been shown and Lady Octavia had declared the south chamber acceptable only because the view redeemed the curtains, Gideon led Cecily to the old ballroom. The doors opened with a faint complaint of hinges, and sunlight spilled across a polished floor that had not seen many gatherings in years. Holland covers draped several chairs near the wall. A pianoforte stood closed at one end. Dust motes moved in the light like tiny dancers too patient to need music. "I stopped using this room after the war," Gideon said. "People expected me not to dance. It became easier to confirm them." Cecily walked a few steps into the room. Her reflection moved faintly beneath her in the floor's shine. Easier is not always kinder. No, he stood near the doorway, giving her the whole room before entering it himself. "You taught me that." She turned back to him. "I did?" "You offered your hand when every sensible person had decided silence was safer. Then you refused to let me make safety into another silence." Cecily looked down at her own hands. She had brought the ivory glove with her, not hidden now, but wrapped in tissue inside her reticule. Lady Octavia had found a woman skilled enough to mend the tear without erasing it entirely. The seam remained visible if one knew where to look. Cecily took it out and unfolded it carefully. "I thought I would hate seeing it again," she said. "Do you?" "No. I think I needed it to remain itself." Gideon approached then, slowly enough that she could have stepped back if she wished. She did not. "May I?" She placed the glove in his hand. He held it with the same care he had once given her hand in the ballroom, as if torn things deserved not pity, but attention. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Offering your hand that night?" Cecily looked around the empty ballroom, then through the tall windows to the green land beyond. She thought of the girl by the column, of Lady Beatrice's hand on her arm, of Marianne's smile, of the moment fear had opened and she had walked through it without knowing where it led. "No," she said. "I regret only how long I believed I needed permission to be kind." Gideon's expression changed, not into sadness exactly, but into the kind of tenderness that had learned restraint. "I regret how long I let fear teach others how to treat me. Then perhaps we both arrived late." "Perhaps." He looked toward the pianoforte. "Shall we begin again?" There was no orchestra. No chandeliered crowd. No gossip waiting behind fans. Gideon crossed the room, opened the pianoforte, and struck a few uncertain notes with one hand, enough to suggest rhythm, not enough to pretend skill. Cecily laughed softly. The sound startled her with its ease. "Your Grace, that is a very poor waltz. I'm a better soldier than musician." "That is not as comforting as you think." His smile appeared fully then, rare and unguarded, and the room seemed to alter around it. He came back to her and offered his hand. "Lady Cecily, would you do me the honor?" This time, she did not step forward because others had stepped back. She did not offer courage to a room that had none. She placed the mended glove in his palm, then laid her bare hand over it, steady and unashamed. "Yes," she said. "I would." They danced without music worthy of the name, moving slowly through sunlight and dust, laughing once when his step caught the edge of a covered chair, falling quiet when the old habit of sorrow passed between them and found no place to settle. His hand remained proper at her back. Her fingers rested lightly in his. Nothing hurried. Nothing claimed. Beyond the door, the household went about its work. Somewhere downstairs, Lady Octavia was no doubt correcting someone's arrangement of flowers. The world continued, but Cecily no longer felt pushed to its edge. When the dance ended, Gideon lifted the mended glove and touched his lips to the repaired seam, not as a grand gesture for witnesses, but as a private vow to the part of her story others had tried to make shameful. "I loved the hand that reached for me before it was safe," he said. Cecily's eyes stung, but she smiled through it. "And I loved the man who learned not to hold it too tightly." He folded his fingers around hers, gently enough that choice remained present in the touch. Together they stood in the old ballroom of Kestrelmere Park, scar and seam, silence and truth, no longer hidden, no longer offered for judgment. Then Cecily placed her hand fully in his, and they began the first dance of their new life.